I'm Stuart Vonnie.
I'm Martha McCallum.
I'm Jason Chaffetz, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, January 25th, 2023. I'm Dave Anthony. Former Vice President Pence is now part of the classified document drama, materials found at his home, as special counsels investigate the Trump and Biden discoveries.
Neither one of them is going to result in criminal charges. So, how in the world do you prosecute former President Trump and not prosecute current President Biden?
I'm Dana Perino. Ukraine is putting up its best fight against a reinvigorated assault from Russian forces. But do they have the firepower and resources to persist?
We're almost a year into the war. I get that we needed to ramp up somewhat, but I think history will look poorly on Biden at how slowly he's acted here in trying to get the Ukrainians what they need.
And I'm Tommy Lahren. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
It's a drama that keeps unfolding. Classified documents found where they shouldn't be. First, former President Trump, who's being investigated by a special counsel over materials the FBI seized from his Florida Mar-a-Lago resort last year. Then came the discovery we learned about this month. President Biden had some documents in an old office from his time as vice president. Then more classified materials were found, and then more, and even more at his Wilmington, Delaware residence, some from his Senate days, too. Now a different Justice Department special counsel is investigating him.
Something bad is going on here, and this is of the utmost importance for our national security.
Republican Congressman James Comer is also investigating as chairman of the House Oversight Committee.
We formally sent requests to the Secret Service about any communication or documents that would give us an idea of who actually had access to that house.
President Biden keeps saying he takes classified documents seriously and is cooperating, adding last week it bugs him the media keeps asking him about it.
We're fully cooperating, looking forward to getting this resolved quickly. I think you're going to find there's nothing there. I have no regrets. I'm following what the lawyers have told me they want me to do. It's exactly what we're doing. There's no there.
Now, yet another ex-vice president says he found documents that have been turned over to the FBI at his home in Indiana. Mike Pence disclosed that just yesterday.
It's a big deal for any of us that were on committees in Congress that handle classified documents.
Trey Gowdy is a Republican and former congressman from South Carolina who hosts his own Fox podcast and also has a new book out this week, which we'll talk about shortly.
To say that we would never leave the room with classified documents is a gross understatement. It wasn't an option. We wouldn't have done it had it been an option. Even when you took notes, your personal notes on classified documents, the notes stayed in the SCIF. So for those of us that served on House Intel or Ethics or Judiciary and dealt with classified documents, we're wondering, how in the world did these documents get from where they were supposed to be to a private residence or a beach house or a locked room in Florida? If you get classified documents in the course of your duties as president or vice president, who's bringing them to you? Who's making sure that you are returning them, not at the end of your tenure, but at the end of the day?
Yeah.
It is befuddling to me how classified information can just be unaccounted for decades.
So a lot has been made, especially by Republicans, that President Biden called former President Trump, reckless, irresponsible for having all those documents at his property that the FBI seized. And now he's dealing with his own, and he says he has no regrets. So the problem, and you dealt with this in Congress, you have Republicans reacting, Democrats reacting. Are they just defending their own team and going after the other team? Is anyone looking at this fairly? Is there way to? I just, you know what I mean? Is one worse than the other, Trump or Biden?
I think you put your finger on maybe why I left. Fairness is really not a virtue in the modern political environment. It's a tremendous virtue in a courtroom. But in politics, we have a tendency to defend our friends and criticize our perceived opponents. I'm not, sophisticated enough as a thinker to have two different standards. I'd like to have one standard. If it's wrong for my opponents to do it, Now, that doesn't minimize. There are always distinctions in cases.
Yeah.
Whether the documents were kept in a pool room or a garage or a home office, yeah, that is a factual distinction. It's just a distinction that doesn't make a difference.
Well, the difference that people point out, especially Democrats, is former President Trump did not give back the documents that he claimed, his lawyers had claimed he did, and the FBI went in and found more after the Trump team had said we'd cooperated. The President Biden says, look, I've been cooperating all along. We found them, we handed them over, and we said, come on in and look for more.
You know, President Trump, I think, to the extent that he's in legal jeopardy, it is for his response. All right, well, there need be no response if you're not asked. Mm-hmm. So what the media says is different is a separate crime. It is obstruction. It is false statement to the FBI through your lawyers. Yeah. But if the FBI never asks you any questions, how in the world can you possibly make a false statement to them? That does not eliminate the other two statutes. Are you possessing property that's not yours? And are you possessing mishandling classified information?
Others have gotten in trouble for that, right, legally?
There are people that have been prosecuted under the gross negligence. I think what the department, and again, trying to be fair, even though there's not like a huge appetite for that, I think the department would tell you we are looking to see whether someone benefited from it.
Okay.
It's not simply the negligence.
Gotcha. Okay.
Which is why it matters what documents were taken by former President Trump and current President Biden, because what was taken may lead you to a motive, and then you can determine whether there was any benefit gleaned.
Okay, all right. So two different special counsels doing two different investigations under the same umbrella. Which one do you think has a harder job?
I actually think they both have pretty easy jobs.
Really?
Because neither one of them is going to result in criminal charges. So, I mean, how in the world do you prosecute former President Trump and not prosecute current President Biden?
What if obstruction is an allegation in one case but not the other?
Then I am sure President Trump supporters would say, you know what, it is really difficult to give misleading or false information to the FBI when they never ask.
Okay.
They're still getting consent to search for President Biden, which means the president can say, I give you consent to search this room, but not that room. They didn't, towards the end, afford that privilege to former President Trump. They used a subpoena, and then they executed a search warrant. I would be curious. I don't know, and I hate speculating, but I'd be curious if there were a full-blown search of all of President Biden's residences, whether we would find more.
Your time in Congress, you did 4 terms. You wrote in your new book, which is, again, Start, Stay, or Leave, The Art of Decision Making. It's out this week. You wrote that you were there too long. Like, you wanted to leave after your 3rd term. You wrote a letter that you were readying, that you were not going to run again for term 4, but you ran again.
Yeah. Friendship. You have to know what your weaknesses are in life, and I have a bunch of them, but friendship has always been a weakness of mine. Tim Scott was my closest friend in Congress. He asked me to stay for good and legitimate reasons.
Senator, South Carolina, you guys became good friends.
He will preach my funeral, so long as he's not responsible for my funeral. He will preach it, yes. But Tim, South Carolina has a rich, provocative history as it relates to race, and he was going to be on the ballot statewide for his own full 6-year term. Mm. And he said, let's do it together. I didn't want to run, but when he talked me into running, he said, let's do it together, and I'll never ask you to stay again. And he never asked me to stay again.
So your book's The Art of Decision Making. You made a decision you didn't want to do.
But as I discuss in the book, this is where leaving is hard. You love your coworkers, but you don't love your job.
Yeah.
So the way I look at it, it was 2 years too long in a job. That was the cost. The benefit is relationships that I will keep for the rest of my life. So was it worth it? I don't know. But also, one thing you cannot do anything about is what has already happened. So I left after 8 years instead of after 6 years. 2 years, is that the right price to pay for lifelong friendships? Probably yes.
You were a federal prosecutor years before you were in Congress. You had wrote in the book it was your dream job.
Was.
But you got sick of it. It became like, I guess, as you wrote, you didn't get a lot of great cases.
The federal system is not where you need to be if you want to prosecute violent crime.
Yeah.
You need to be in the state system. So I left my dream job because I wanted to prosecute homicide and assault and robberies and burglaries. And I did that for 10 years. And then also write about when the price you pay for even doing something you love is too much. And for me, the price was, from a faith standpoint, what I grew up being told and what I was listening to on Sunday mornings was not consistent with what I was seeing in crime scene photos.
Well, I know what you wrote in the book, but why? What was it? Were you questioning why God could? Because people say that all the time. How can God let children be molested? Right? Why could God let these crimes? You've seen things that none of us have seen.
You have an elderly couple. They've worked hard their entire lives. They've done nothing wrong. And someone comes into their house with a hammer and beats them to death and then rapes her post-mortem. Yeah, I think it's appropriate to say, God, why?
You wrote that your first big case, and this is why closing argument was early in your book, you wrote the ending of your trial first.
Yes. I do it with speeches. I do it with my Sunday night television show. People don't remember everything. Some people argue they remember what they hear first. Some people argue what they hear last. Nobody argues what you hear in the middle. So if the closing argument is the most important part of a trial or a speech, then why not kind of map that out and see what gets you there?
When you made your choices, you talk about starting, you talk about staying and then leaving. What's the hardest thing for you? If you have a job you like, staying or leaving, what's harder?
I think staying is harder because it lacks the excitement of something new and fresh. And we kind of condition our minds to think that the grass is greener somewhere else. And so what I caution people in the book is make sure what you're leaving doesn't follow behind you. If you're not happy with something about yourself, then changing where you work is not going to fix that. True. I don't think.
You're in the media now. You wrote in the book that the media was one of the worst things you dealt with when you were in Congress. Now you are the media.
Yeah.
Have you had a hard time with that?
I try to be fair. On my show, I think the best argument should win. So what I do on my show, I've had people that I don't agree with anything comes out of their mouth. But I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then the viewer can make up his or her mind who has the more compelling case. Look, when you cross-examined people in murder cases, disagreeing on whether the tax rate should be 36 or 34% just doesn't seem that significant.
Start, stay, or leave. The Art of Decision Making. It's the new book that is just out this week from former Congressman Trey Gowdy. You can watch him Sunday night in America on Fox News Channel. Also, the Trey Gowdy podcast right here on our Fox News Podcast Network. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for reading the book.
This is Tommy Lahren with your Fox News commentary coming up.
It's been nearly a year since Russia began its invasion of Ukraine. President Vladimir Putin's anticipated quick victory, which military analysts predicted worldwide, never took place thanks to the resilience and perseverance of the Ukrainian people and their military. However, in recent weeks, we are seeing a shift in tides. Russia has been claiming advances in both the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, threatening to seize important strategic footholds. As Russia has shaken up its strategy with a newly appointed commander, President Zelenskyy has continued to stress the need for heavy weaponry, like modern battle tanks, to fight off what experts anticipate to be a reinvigorated ground offensive from Russian forces.
We have to speed up. Time must become our common weapon, just like air defense and artillery, armored vehicles and tanks, which we are negotiating about with you, and which actually will make the victory.
Western allies have met many of Zelenskyy's calls, with the U.S. announcing plans to send hundreds of armored vehicles and rockets, and Britain pledging to send 14 Challenger tanks to Ukraine. And UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson reiterated his support for Ukraine while visiting Kyiv this past Sunday, saying this.
The UK will be sticking by Ukraine for as long as it takes. You're going to win and you're going to get all the Russians out of your country, but we will be there for the long term.
The war on Ukraine has raged on since February of 2022. And while President Zelenskyy and his people have projected strength and competency, the winter is bringing fresh difficulties for Ukrainians defending against Russia's new war tactics and immense military power.
This summer, or maybe this spring, we're going to see a significant counteroffensive from Ukraine.
Michael Allen is founder and managing director of Beacon Global Strategies, LLC, and former special assistant for national security to President George W. Bush.
They have been preparing and stockpiling weapons and other types of artillery in anticipation of this. They have said they're not even using all of their equipment for the little ongoing battles and skirmishes that are happening today because they're trying to amass it for a bigger run, both in the east, called the Donbass, and in the south as well.
This week on America's Newsroom, you said that Ukraine could go on the offensive even more, and we've been watching this long, drawn-out debate of Germany being willing to send their Leopard 2 tanks. How did that end up, and what could Ukraine do with those?
So you're exactly right. We have been trying to figure out, NATO, what the Ukrainians would need for a big counteroffensive. And I think all military experts have settled on they need more armor. They need armored vehicles. They need tanks. And the ones that American strategists believe are best suited for the terrain in Ukraine are the German Leopard tanks. Ours are terrific as well, of course, but I think it's harder logistically, of course, to get them there, the types of fuel it uses and how often it needs to be refueled. And so just about everyone in NATO, I think, except for Germany, has been on board with this. And at different times, we thought Germany would be just okay with at least other countries that they had previously sold their Leopard tanks to. They have to agree by contract to agree that they can be transferred to Ukraine. But, last week, we suffered a big defeat diplomatically. I think the Biden administration failed to convince Germany how important this was. And they've put on pressure all weekend long, and I think the Germans are getting close, at least to okay others to send their tanks, and they may be on the verge of agreeing to send some of their own. So that's good news if that happens, because, of course, we need our allies to step up. It can't be only the United States that's out here financing and transferring equipment. We need a big, gigantic economy like the Germans to step up, and I hope they're about to do that.
Does Germany have good reason to be hesitant?
I don't think so. They look back on their history and they have said things just morally. We want to be in the middle of the pack. We don't want to be seen as having German tanks rolling towards Russia again, trying to think of the echoes of World War II. But I think that's falling on a lot of deaf ears. People are saying, listen, your obligations now are for the peace and security of the world. Clearly here, Russia is the aggressor. And what you need to do as a leader in Europe and a participant in NATO is send tanks or send anything that you have that's particularly good for the battlefield and get it in the game. And I think they've been dragging their feet, and it's really raised a lot of questions about whose side are you on after all? Are you just trying to wait to the end of the war so you can have terrific economic relations with Russia all over again, oil and gas, etc.? But we're dragging them there, and I hope we get them there any moment now.
Boris Johnson, the former prime minister of the UK, said the sooner we can help Ukraine to victory, the sooner their suffering will be over. But it feels to me like the Russians, they just keep going. They have lost a lot of people. We know that. But they're bringing more conscripts in, and they continue to fight. As people forced to fight will fight. So what about the Russian positioning right now? What are they thinking?
So I think Putin believes he still has cards to play. You're right. He's continuing to press people into military service. There are reports in rural areas where they literally go grab people and put them on a bus and send them to the front lines. These are not well-trained troops when they finally get to Ukraine and enter the battle. But it is still, I think, exhausting for the Ukrainians to have to continue to try and kill or defeat waves of new soldiers coming from Russia. And so I think it would be wrong of me to say it's not having any effect. I think it is having some effect on the Ukrainians and their ability to cope with this incredible mass of Russian soldiers come at them all the time. I think it will help complicate what the Ukrainians are trying to do. But you're right. It's 2023. This is the pivotal year in the conflict. They need to make progress, especially in the South, so that we can begin to look to a day where we won't need so much U.S. support, where they won't need so much NATO support, so that we, the United States, can start looking toward Asia so that Taiwan can be sufficiently funded and armed to deter China from taking Taiwan. That's in our national interest as well. So we have a lot going on right now and a lot of arms that we need to transfer to different allies.
You and I both worked for President George W. Bush, and of course there was a ton of foreign policy challenges at the time. One of the things that he would always make sure to do was to say, we need to explain to the American people why this matters. And so there were big speeches, but even smaller speeches and interviews and a constant explanation, because he knew that it was going to be a long generational war against ideological enemies. What I don't think you get from the Biden administration at all is a drumbeat for them to explain to the American people why this matters. And there's about to be some budget fights, and there are going to be some questions about money that is being spent on defense overall and funds being sent to Ukraine. Do you think the Biden administration recognizes that it has not communicated well enough to the American people, and do you think that will change?
I think the president has done a terrible job of explaining the stakes to the American people. He very rarely engages on this issue. And even those of us that are Republicans that are pretty skeptical of President Biden know that the American people need to hear from the commander in chief about what our national interests are. He at least needs to try and make the case. He hasn't done so. I don't know if it's because he has too much else going on or he's just exhausted, but he has not made the strategic communications case for why this is so incredibly important. So it would be incredibly helpful if President Biden made this strategic case and got out there and explained the U.S. national interest.
It does feel that Russia is just so vicious in attacking civilians. And the world response is dismay, but it feels like the West gives Ukraine what it needs, but long after they have already said that they need it. So this week, it's tanks. What are they going to need in the near future that we can anticipate?
I think it's going to be an Air Force, and they have been asking for that since the Russians invaded. We've been lucky, frankly, that the Russians have not figured out a way to establish air superiority over Ukraine. And I don't think we're going to be able to have a modern fighting force for Ukraine to be able to repel a neighbor like Russia unless they have F-16s, or if it's not F-16s, then it's the Swedish fighter. And you're exactly right. I think the Biden administration has been overly cautious all along. They failed to deter Russia from invading Ukraine in the first place. And they seem to really draw out the decision-making process first on howitzers and then later on certain sophisticated artillery. And now finally tanks is having its day today. I mean, we're almost a year into the war. I get that we needed to ramp up somewhat, but I think history will look poorly on Biden at how slowly he's acted here in trying to get the Ukrainians what they need. And of course, it's because it's in our national interest. I don't want to do or get involved in disputes around the world that aren't in the U.S. national interest. I think this one is, for the reasons we discussed, and I think Biden should have stepped this up long ago.
Let's talk about one other thing. You have been involved in a project. It's a book. And let me tell you, this book that's coming, it is a big one and an important one. I read through some of it today. It is called Handoff, the Foreign Policy George W. Bush Passed to Barack Obama. Why now? What is the project? And what might we learn from picking this up and looking through it?
Well, the vision of President Bush was to have the best transition in the history of the country. For us to update the Obama people in 2009 as they came into a very difficult foreign policy situation, to have the best of what the Bush White House had put together and performed on for the previous 8 years. So we all wrote memorandum. They were highly classified memorandum. Mine was on Iran, North Korea, and other nuclear matters. Others did things on Russia and Ukraine and or China. And so it is a wonderful snapshot in time. These classified memos have been largely declassified. The president's second national security advisor, Steve Hadley, had us all write a bit of an update essay to say, how did Bush do now that we have the distance of, over 12 years of looking backwards? And so I think for people that really like foreign policy and really like history, it's a terrific snapshot. Where did things end in January 2009 when Bush handed it over to President Obama? And how have these issues evolved? And we only need to look at the Russia chapter to see that President Bush regrets that he was not able to get the relationship with Russia on a firmer footing. Instead, I think Putin showed his true colors, certainly by 2008 when he invaded Georgia, and later under President Obama, he invaded Ukraine in 2014 for the first time. So I think it puts all of these events in perspective. And for that, I think it's just a gift to history.
Michael Allen, it is always good to talk to you. Thank you for being part of our show.
Thank you.
In other news,
I'm Gianna Gelosi. Did you get the COVID shot? Did you notice your Botox fading faster afterwards? A recent study from a group of researchers in Israel found patients visited their tox docs more often after receiving their coronavirus vaccine, striking panic in the hearts and foreheads of some users. Researchers found that after receiving the Pfizer mRNA vaccine, the average time before patients need a touch-up of the wrinkle reducer is significantly shortened. On average, the 45 participants received Botox every 118 days prior to their COVID shot, but after the jab, the number fell to 96 days. Doctors say it's likely due to an increased immune response. In the study published in the fall in the Journal of Cosmetic Dermatology, researchers concluded that Botox injections might be less effective following the coronavirus vaccine, although they say more research would be needed to verify that effect. It's something doctors have told publications they've seen firsthand, though many of them still tout the benefits of the COVID shot. COVID vaccine aside, research also shows Botox immunity can occur on its own. Approximately 1% to 3% of users develop a Botox-blocking antibody that renders the injections practically useless, according to Very Well Health. Dr. Dendi Engelman, the director of dermatology at the Schaefer Clinic in Manhattan, also notes that increased exercise, sweating, saunas, steam rooms, hot yoga, and certain medications could all cause neuromodulators to wear off more rapidly. For the Fox News Rundown, I'm Gianna Gelosi.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Stay on top of the latest news and information from Fox News. Listen and download the Fox News Hourly Update on your time. The trending stories you need anytime you want it. Listen and download now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com. Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary. Tommy Lahren. What's on your mind?
TikTok is a Chinese communist enterprise disguised as a mind-numbing social media platform. I, for one, wish it was banned nationwide for obvious reasons like data mining, privacy infringements, and overall brain-melting properties, but thankfully at least some universities are catching on. The University of Texas at Austin has banned TikTok via campus networks, making it impossible for anyone to access the app, even on personal devices, if they're connecting via the school's wired or wireless networks. Not only will this eliminate some of the data harvesting and privacy risks associated with this social media platform, it'll also increase productivity and hopefully brain function. Some students are angered by this move, saying the loss of TikTok access inhibits their research ability. Kiddos, if you're citing TikTok as an academic source, you better start reevaluating the way you research anyway. A world with less TikTok is a better and a smarter world. I'm Tommy Lahren, and you can watch my show Tommy Lahren is Fearless at Outkick.com.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. And now, stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. Listen ad-free on Fox News Podcasts Plus on Apple Podcasts. And Prime members can listen to the show ad-free on Amazon Music. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com.
I'm
Guy Benson. Join me weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern as we break down the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest newsmakers and guests. Listen live on the Fox News app or get the free podcast at GuyBensonShow.com.